Thank you, Jane. So we've addressed the question of what is the meaning of goodness from within your different faith perspective. And I was really struck by the fact that all of you have spoken to the importance of spiritual foundation in translating in very practical ways how we might relate to others and to the world around us. I think maybe Mr. Hundal had said translating goodness into action. And so just open up a 15, 20-minute discussion among all of us, and certainly feel free to jump in at any time. But just to kind of start us off, and then again, I'm happy to take any questions that have come to mind or comments that you'd like to make to one another. But let's first start off with this question. I'm curious to hear how, from your belief system or the worldview that you've spoken about, how that worldview uniquely affects how you personally respond to examples of suffering or injustice or lack of goodness in society, however you might define that. What resources does your faith or the perspective you're speaking from provide in responding to kind of those realities around us? And I know some of you have spoken about that a little bit already, but maybe say a few words from the perspective you represent, and hopefully we'll have a turn for everyone, and then we'll open it up.
From the Sikh faith, as far as, because it's a practical faith, everything we do in our lives from when we're taught is we need to be action-oriented, that we need to look out for others. That we're taught this mentality of that we're not only in this for ourselves, we're in this for others. And if we look at historical from the Sikh faith itself and how the faith started, about treating everybody equal and putting in practice that says, okay, everybody, whether you're a ruler, whether you're a street sweeper, no matter how much money you all have in the eyes of God the same status, that you're no different from one another. And we need to treat ourselves the same. In God's way, this is how He wants us to be out there. So in that sense, and if we look at the Sikh faith itself, it is known for for things as far as standing up for others. If we look at historically, two of the gurus gave their lives for protecting society as a whole. And if we look at that the Sikh faith says, first, we need to think of society as a whole, no matter what faith that society is, and we need to look at how we can stand up for them if they are in a position of where they're being oppressed, whether socially, economically, or leadership-wise, and we need to look out and help them get into a place where they can fulfill their lives.
One of the highest principles in our faith is that, which is common to other faiths also, is service to man is a service to God. And the Hindus' highest ideal is to be one with the Brahman, which is the absolute reality. And in each of us, there is a piece of that which we call Atma. And when I care for my neighbor or people who need, actually I'm trying to have a bigger existence and trying to see the other person as part of myself. So whatever I do for myself, I'm supposed to do for others too. So that is a kind of practical aspect of Hinduism. And ultimately that translates into a lot of those institutions which are there in the case of big disaster, flood and earthquake and this and that. And there are some particular centers in my faith. Actually, my faith has so many divisions, so many different kinds that I particularly belong to one school that is called Ramakrishna school, and they have this motto that all over the country, the volunteers from Ramakrishna are there whenever there is a need. So that is something they believe that by serving others, we're actually serving God.
Judy, you're unmuted, so I'm assuming you have something to share next. So
Gosh.
would you like to respond?
Yeah, I will say something. And what I'll say is there's the ideal and there's the reality. There's not one religion that, well, maybe the Sikhs. I don't know about the Sikhs. But everyone else who I see on the screen, there are people who claim to have the same faith that you have, and I'll say that also for Buddhism, who have acted reprehensibly in the name of the religion. I'll speak for Buddhism, whether it's some of the Zen monks who supported the Japan's rather horrendous actions during World War II towards the Chinese and towards the Pacific Islands and Korea, and also in Myanmar, the way some of the Buddhist monks have led the actions against the Burmese.
The Rohingya, yeah.
The Rohingya, thank you. The Rohingya. And so there's no religion that I know of where once you get power, people will abuse it. And so I think when we talk about the ideal of, charity and justice and all this stuff, which is wonderful and which we all really want to see happening, the fact is, I think we really need to recognize not only that people fall short, but that they often use the structure that we're using to promote goodness, that they're using that structure in order to hurt others. And I think we need to recognize that. And that's all I want to say.
Yeah, that's an excellent reminder, and maybe a call to humility, I think, and self-reflection, I think, on all of our parts, whether it's those of us speaking or those of you watching this later. That's an excellent point, Judy.
Just from my personal experience, I think I was basically raised with a social Darwinianism. The Confucius philosophy emphasized education and elite. So there's a social stratification in the Chinese society, and you have to compete academically and socially in order to prove your value. It's really hard for me to see, blue collar workers and, the white collar, higher class people as equal. But since I've been, a Christian, that kind of mentality or worldview has been gradually shifted. And now I just, look at everyone, no matter what's your education, career, and IQ, and, wealth, you're all precious. So that's one of the things. And the other thing for me is that I've experienced a kind of a major spiritual shift inside of me when I was being revealed of my own sinfulness. A lot of times before I really believed sincerely, I thought myself as a person with good behavior, and see myself a lot of times as victims of conflict, especially within the family, within marriage. I saw myself as the victim, but I think Holy Spirit really used some unique way to enlighten me and help me to realize that I'm the cause of conflicts, and my sinfulness is the source of injustice. And I have to really rely on God to work every day to deal with my own sinful nature. And that's a big revelation in my life.
So, Mr. Almohammadi and Dr. Brody, any thoughts on that question? Or if not, certainly feel free to open up and maybe respond to something others have said, or share a thought of your own that you'd like to throw into the mix here.
Yeah, I just would like to add something to that question. From my perspective, I've seen many things around the globe, including in the Middle East and in our back home. So some of them, like anarchy, disunity, injustice, and social privilege, have always been considered manifestations of decay and disintegration of a society. So, and then I believe in education, that we have to have education, so to educate people how to eliminate this kind of things that would fragile the society. I figure out that the more you educate yourself and you can educate the community among you, the more justice and social privilege that could be eliminated, and then the justice would be served, and then you could make a good contribution to the community that you live in within. That's what I would like to emphasize on. Thank you.
Dr. Brody?
Sure, yeah. In Judaism, the word halakha is often used to refer to, or it's often translated as though it means Jewish law. It literally means the path, though. And for me, what it can represent in terms of your question, in the context of your question, is the fact that we don't start out just with this perfect set of principles that we can apply to reality and then just squeeze reality into the box that the principles are in, but rather we have a conversation about what we should be doing. And the conversation in Judaism has happened over the course of thousands of years, so that, for example, this week, there was a ruling that a bunch of Sephardi rabbis issued that said, you know, you can use this software that we're using here to have your Passover Seder, because you shouldn't get a big family gathering together right now, even though it's Passover coming up and you might want to see everyone that you know and all be together in one place. But it would be better to keep everybody separate and use something like this to facilitate the service, even though, according to a prior understanding of halakha, you shouldn't use an electronic device like this on a holiday. So time change and things that people need change, and the conversation can change with it. And I think that's related to this point about whether, why is the world so messed up? Great traditions, right? And part of the reason the world is so messed up is that we may have bad understandings of what we should do, what the tradition says, how we should fulfill it, and the only way to address that is by having a conversation together. So I feel that my approach to, or at least I would hope that my approach to injustice and problems in the world is informed by that Jewish idea of human beings basically trying to figure out together how to improve as part of a group conversation. And not just thinking that because we got this perfect tradition once, that it just to the world and just keep applying it and it'll work at some point.
That's a perfect segue, Dr. Brody. Thank you, to opening up the conversation maybe a little bit more fully. I'd really just like to turn it over to all of you and ask, are there other aspects of what other panelists have shared, or something that you've heard that, again, just sparked another thought here that you'd like to respond to, or maybe there's a point that maybe we should dig deeper into and you'd like to throw out your own question to all of us. So I'm just going to pause here and see what you would like to initiate in terms of speaking to one another, or maybe guiding us in a different direction for a few minutes. I think we have probably about 5-10 minutes or so for that. Yeah, Judy.
Well, I just want to say that what Jane said really resonated with me, and that's, I'm not going to say I'm a convert because I'm still a Jew, but certainly my Buddhist practice came about later in my life, and what happens when you have a new spiritual practice that's very deep and very important to you, and the way that it can do something to your life that wasn't there before, I think, and in particular the way that it can tear down your sense of ego and your sense of self-importance and all of that. Obviously, Buddhism is very different from Christianity, but I really, what you said really resonated with me because it had a similar thing. I think when we're familiar with something as a child, we may not, it's difficult to see it deeply, and to come to something else, I think there's something in that what you said really resonated with me.
Yeah, I think the beauty of Christian faith is it's really paradoxical, because after I accepted this faith, on one side, I realized that I have a very big problem. And on the other hand, I realized that I'm created with God's image. So, you know, you've got two great potentials within you. And God worked on your better side to shape you every day. So that's what I'm seeing with this transformation process. But I do want to ask a question, you know, since we all kind of have a transcendent belief. Yeah, my question is, what does eternity play into your moral decision in this world, in today's life? Eternity.
Dr. Brody, I felt like you were wanting to make a comment, maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, I didn't mean to indicate that, but I can say something about this.
Put you on the spot there.
Well, eternity to me, there are obviously a wide range of understandings within the Jewish tradition, and different traditions within the tradition say different things. But for the most part, I think Judaism encourages a focus on this world. It encourages a focus on the span of the human life and the human generations. We are discouraged by a number of rabbinic texts from speculation about what comes after this world, what was before this world. And so to me, eternity, insofar as it is relevant to this world, it's because it shows up in little pieces. So for example, for me, that's what the Sabbath is about. If you ever have an opportunity to read Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's tiny little book on the Sabbath, I highly recommend it. But he talks about the idea that eternity can exist within our time if you change your attitude towards it, if you change your position towards it. And the Sabbath is supposed to be a kind of eternity, which gives you a sense of other possibilities for the world. It's a kind of a practice that can give you a sense that although we do focus on this world and we want to do our work of justice in this world and we want to make our improvements in this world, we have to have some sort of standpoint. We look at this world that isn't entirely within this world. We have to at least be able to imagine that. It's possible to disagree with that. You can try to say that you can develop a completely and wholly immanent view that also nonetheless offers a standpoint for correction. But that's how I see it.
I would like to jump in and just emphasize that point that I'm so fascinated by the point that we all have many things in common from the first dialogue. Now I'm so fascinating about many different beliefs. I learned a lot from all the people with us. I'm so honored to be with them. So I'm just curious if we could dig in depth about the commonality that we have and how can we react to the pandemic that we have today.
Anyone like to jump in on that? Or Mr. Bhaduri, you look like you had a thought.
I have a question. I don't know whether that is related to this one. I want to ask people that what is happening right now in the world, the coronavirus and other things, the human misery and all those things. What do we think? Is this something coming from God, or is this something happening as a natural course of laws of nature, and somewhere we have interfered or screwed up something for which this has gone, out of control? So what is the feeling that you have on this?
Good question. Judy.
Yeah, the basic question that Buddha had when he left his comfortable life was what it was to understand suffering and the origin of suffering, and then bring about the end of suffering. And what that means is that suffering is there's this 3 marks of existence, and one of them is suffering. So suffering is unavoidable. It's also, you can't avoid it, but you can come through it. You can end it, in some sense, but there's always suffering in some sense. And when we say this terrible thing that's happening with the coronavirus, well, there are terrible things that are always happening. And so I really see this as not like a special thing. This is just, it's hitting us, middle class Americans who are not particularly oppressed right now. And in our lifetime, we have not had to deal with it. But you look all over the world, there are people who are suffering terribly. They were suffering before the coronavirus. And so I don't see it as a very special thing. I think we think it's special because we have not been hit in our lifetimes by anything like this. But I don't think it's special at all.
Others?
Yeah, I just heard a talk by Tim Keller yesterday about suffering from different worldview perspectives. And he mentioned that the secularism is the least prepared for suffering because their meaning and purpose are all based on materialistic, this world. I mean, that's a major difference between secularism and religions. And among religions, there are some that take suffering as opportunity to get closer to God. Some take suffering as inevitable experience in human life, and some take sufferings as a way to develop human characters. So suffering has meaning for a lot of religious transcendental worldviews, but not for secularism.
I know that whoever's out there watching this and those of you who have participated, I'm sure that we all have many thoughts on how to best respond in the current climate and maybe the question that Mr. Bhaduri was raising, trying to again get meaning behind all of this and wrestling with where we sit right now. I really appreciate the way that you've all engaged with this. But let me just pause here and give 1 or 2 more minutes if anyone wants to have a final word on either the question that you've just heard or other aspects of the discussion before we wrap up our time together.
I just want to kind of go back to what Judy had said earlier about what is ideal and what is practical, what is reality as far as faiths go. In my views or in my experience, we'll see that faith can be very destructive. And we look at history and we look at even modern day or past history that things are done in the name of faith simply because the leaders of that faith dictate what's going on. But in personal experience, when we talk one-on-one like we're doing here, we get a vastly different viewpoint of what the faith is. And we see that faith tends to have a lot more commonality than we have differences. And a lot of the things that we've discussed here about good things, about charity, about service, about justice, everybody on this panel has mentioned those things. So I think when we look at it from an individual viewpoint, when we are in society and everyday life, faith is very different. But when we look at it from whether it's a country or societal point of view, faith does tend to be, can be very divisive. And we see that in countries throughout the world. And I think that's where we need to get to is see why is that when our faiths generally tell us to do what is the opposite of essentially what as a society we tend to be doing.
I just would like to go back to the point of the suffering from the Islamic perspective. Some scholars believe, based on the many hadith comes from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, that says the suffering is kind of signs that God likes you. They want to clean you from all the sins that you commit in your life, because no one on this earth is immune from committing sins. That's why God just likes you and try to clean you from the sins that you commit in your life. The other point, like you said, with this pandemic, no one immune of this kind of pandemic, no religion immune of this kind of pandemic. In Medina, in my hometown, this is the first time in the history the Holy Mosque is closed. No one goes to the Holy Mosque in Medina due to the coronavirus, which is all the people now suffering from this kind of pandemic.
Thanks for sharing, Mr. Almohammadi. And I just am really struck too by all of the wonderful comments that you've all made and how clear it is that all of our perspectives, whether secular, agnostic, atheist, religious, representing a certain tradition, all have direct implications for kind of how we live life and how we respond in times like this. And so I really appreciate all of you for joining me today and for showing us that we can have a wonderful and engaging discussion on really deep and important topics. I know there's much more that we could say. We could go a lot deeper in a lot of really interesting directions. I hope we'll have opportunity in the future personally and hopefully actually in person rather than online. And I also hope that for all of you that have watched this discussion, that these conversations have opened up new perspectives and will help you to ask the same questions of yourselves as we've been challenged to think about here today about how can we build a good society and how can we overcome perhaps some of the impulses that we've struggled with here or talked about at the call that might work against these common goals of building a good society and achieving goodness and in responding to suffering, which is where many of us are sitting right now. So again, I want to just extend a special thanks to all the presenters for your time, for the effort you've made to be here in this unusual format. And thank you again to all of you who have joined us and maybe watching this presentation separately. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.